There we go. And one thing to know, we will be following up afterward, and we will send you this recording as well as some contact info for our panelists if you want to get in touch with further questions, and also a report on cyber vulnerabilities if you would like us to send that. So you'll have a chance later to volunteer to receive that afterward. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists and we're going to get this thing started. So I am first going to introduce to you Delcie Bean. Delcie is the founder and CEO of the employee-owned company Paragus IT, and he does a ton with cybersecurity in his day-to-day. He advises CEOs and business leaders on how to stay protected and protect their business. And he also has been involved with remediation efforts for those who have experienced cyber attacks. So he's a perfect person to talk to us about those risks and how to protect yourself and what to do if it happens to you. And Matt Geffin, who's our very own vice president here at Webber and Grinnell Insurance. Matt has many clients in the business world and advises them on what kind of insurance you want to consider getting to protect your business. And in the case that you were to experience something like this, that you're prepared and have proper recourse and the resources you need to get yourself back on your feet. All right, gentlemen, did I forget anything before we launch into this thing? We good to go? All
good
right.
here. Excited by the Metallica, that's for sure.
Awesome. Great. So can you still see my screen? I don't have the yellow box around it anymore. We're good to go? All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Delcie, and we're going to get started with this thing. So Delcie, you're on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Reynolds, and thank you everybody for being here today. I'm glad that Matt and Reynolds were excited by that initial intro. It struck every nerve in my body and caused me so much anxiety that I was almost needed to excuse myself for a few minutes, because that is the reality. I mean, that visual depiction, while entertaining as it may be and look like a nice lightning show, is reality. And having to be on the defending side of that attack and trying to keep all of those little blinking lights from destroying somebody's business that they spent 30 years building or more, it's not the least stress-inducing activity of my day. So I'm glad I provided a little bit of energy. Hopefully we can provide a little bit more context around that as we go through this presentation. So I'm going to start off by telling you just a little bit about who Paragus is. I'm going to jump right into telling you about kind of what is the threat landscape. And that's an important, ever-changing thing. If you've attended a cybersecurity webinar before, it's always a different latest threat. And so we'll talk about not what has been happening in the last 10 years, but what's happening right now. What do you need to be thinking about? And I'm going to show you just a brief demonstration of some of the different tools and techniques that hackers use to get into your organization. And if anybody wants to volunteer, I'm happy to use them as a guinea pig. And then I know that Matt's going to do an introduction of Webber and Grinnell and tell us all about the cyber insurance landscape and the insurance requirements to get those policies, which is a very dynamically changing thing. If we did this presentation 24 months ago, all the content would have been different. So if you have heard one of these before, you probably have not heard this, and it's really important you pay attention because it is changing constantly.
Nice. Delcie, we already have a question, but it's about Webber and Grinnell. So I'm going to, if you ask that question, we'll get to it when we get to Matt's section, just to let people know. All right, next slide, here we go.
Yeah, so just a real quick kind of background of who Paragus is. Reynolds mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that we are an employee-owned company. We're just over 55 full-time employees. We have an office in Hadley, Massachusetts. We are about to open up an office in Worcester, Massachusetts. And we support the IT networks of about 155 companies. So it means that those companies depend on us to manage and oversee their technology. Go ahead. The company has been around for just about 16 years, but in the last 10 years, we really made a strategic decision to focus on a very narrow set of business. And for us, that means really being laser focused on this idea of helping small businesses manage their IT. There's plenty of IT vendors out there, people you can hire to fix the computers when they break and to do some light monitoring. But where we have really specialized is on the partnership. The kind of clients we work with don't have CIOs, don't have CTOs. They don't have a lot of in-house expertise and kind of resources around thinking about the strategy of technology, whether it's risk mitigation like we're talking about today, or whether it's efficiency or productivity, or whether it's market differentiation. And so we've really built our business around this philosophy of being a holistic partner to our clients and helping them with all facets of technology, not just the break, fix, computer repair. Go ahead. Our core purpose, as we like to say, is this idea of making IT fun. And we mean that very seriously. We fundamentally believe that if technology is something that people enjoy using, if they find that it makes their jobs easier, more efficient, more effective, that's ultimately going to help the company. So we view it as our goal, and our purpose is to remove all the friction, all the frustration, all of the pain in the buttness out of IT, and to make not only using the technology fun and easy, but also make the experience of getting help when you need it fun and easy, so that nobody's ever hesitant to get that help. Go ahead. And the last thing I'll tell you about Paragus before we jump in here is that our company is broken into 5 distinct departments. First, we have what we call the 4 pillars of IT. So we do have the on-demand support. This is the help desk that is available 24/7, 365 to deal with all those problems that are happening. Then we have our security and compliance folks. These are the ones trying to prevent the issues from happening. They're the ones trying to stay ahead of this stuff and manage things so that we don't end up with issues. Then we have our strategic folks. Their job is to help our clients use technology to make their businesses better, faster, more efficient, more successful, and safe. And then our automation folks, which are all about how to leverage technology to make your company more efficient and effective when it comes to doing manual and repetitive tasks. And then kind of underlining the 4 pillars of IT are our products department, so that we have professional full-time product managers involved when we help our clients with any of the IT projects that we do for them. Go ahead. All right, so let's get into kind of the evolution of cyber threat. And cyber criminals have really stepped up their game. If we think back to the Nigerian prince trying to get us to, give him money so we could collect his inheritance and help him launder it, it's just such a different world. It's a different world from a lot of different reasons. The complexity of the attack, the amount of money involved, and the complexity of the organizations conducting the attacks. A lot of people don't kind of fully grasp this, but there are office towers in countries, especially in Eastern Europe, entire office buildings where hundreds of people show up to work every day for a criminal organization whose entire sole purpose in life is to hack mainly American businesses. They have departments who do phishing attacks and collect data. They have departments who then execute attacks and do ransomware. They have different divisions within the company who have 9 to 5 jobs who show up and do work. This isn't kids in a basement anymore. This isn't like this mysterious dark people in these like closets. These are really professionally run organizations with hundreds of $millions in annual revenue, which is extorted from American businesses. And the worst part of it all is they're allowed to operate with almost complete immunity. Their own governments are not coming after them for various reasons that I won't get into to keep this from becoming too political. And our government has very little jurisdiction in these countries and can do very little about it. And so because you have this massive umbrella of immunity, the crimes are just continuing and ramping up because of the level of success and the level of revenue they can generate. So let's take a look at kind of a little bit more about what that looks like. So to put this in context of our audience, I think the first thing to understand is that for the most part, small businesses are the target. Big businesses are hard to get into. They have very complex systems, lots of layers, lots of protection. They're not really the target anymore. The biggest piece are individuals are still targeted heavily, but then the second biggest piece of the market is the small business market. That's where most of the money is made, to be honest. Go ahead. This is just astounding, but 85% of all email attachments as of 2021 are now somewhat harmful. And this is something that has just exploded really in the last 12 months. All of these new attacks where basically one mailbox gets breached and they use that mailbox to send out hundreds of thousands of emails to other people asking them to open up an attachment that then prompts them for credentials so they can steal your information. They're generating such a high volume of email attachments, and such a high percentage of those are malicious. 91% of attacks are launched from phishing attacks. So you're going to hear me probably over talk or talk ad nauseum about just how important cybersecurity training and testing is for your employees, how important it is to have your email filtered, because this is really where the point of entry is. Once a week, we're helping mitigate a situation whereby a client's employee clicked on an email, allowed somebody to the organization, and as a result, we're now dealing with very mild attack to a very extreme attack. It just depends on how bad the situation ended up being. This is something that should make all of us nauseous. We're talking about $6 trillion in cost by the end of this year. That's just astounding. And there's very little being done about it, unfortunately. Again, I'll keep this from getting too geopolitical. Go ahead. This is another common misconception that these Apple iPhone devices are safe. That was true for a little while. Now there is no safe. Apple iStore, which is considered one of the safest marketplaces on the internet, there are 24,000 apps being removed a day because they contain some sort of malicious code. And so the volume of apps is so high that Apple can't inspect them, so they have to kind of remove them after the fact, which means if you get an app the day it's released and it happens to have malicious code in it, it's too late. Ransomware is up 180% for 2018. I probably don't have to tell most of you this. You've heard about it, you've seen it. By this point, I would fairly safely say that everybody on this call either has had some form of ransomware or personally knows somebody who has had a form of ransomware. If that's not the case, then I would assume that it's just a matter of time or you don't have a lot of friends. I'm not sure which of those it is. And then finally, the last point, a business is hit with ransomware every 13 seconds. This is bad. And so we hear about the big ones in the news, like we hear about when an oil pipeline or when a major food packaging company gets hit, but this is happening every single minute of the day. It's happening several times a minute every day. It's just gotten to this point that it's almost commonplace, and that's a very unfortunate place. Go ahead. All right, so kind of what are they after? In small businesses, typically what we're after, or what the hackers are after, is predominantly they want to either steal data or they want to cause you damage. So the data is going to be oftentimes just stealing basic credentials. That's the most common type of attack. And then on the more extreme side, trade secrets and things like that, proprietary intellectual property, or they're trying to cause damage, which is basically ransomware or some other form of extortion to steal money from the business. Those are the two most common things. The other thing that you'll see a lot of are what are often called kind of these man-in-the-middle attacks or impersonation attacks. And the goal there is to trick somebody in your company or somebody who you do business with to wire money to the wrong place. And probably most of us have seen or heard of one of those experiences. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And go ahead. And so this just talks about kind of why are small businesses so targeted? Well, it has a lot to do with small businesses don't spend nearly as much money on IT security as large organizations do. A recent study found that small businesses are typically spending about 10% of their annual expense budget on technology. And that includes their line of business applications, support, everything else. The larger organizations are spending significantly more money than that. And so they're just in a better position. The other thing that we see a lot of times with small businesses, the equipment typically is aged a little bit longer. Small businesses may keep computers around for 4 or 5, 6 years, sometimes longer. We won't talk about that. And a lot of times in a very small business, the owner is kind of the chief person in charge of security. And that person, that owner, is wearing a million hats. They're also worried about insurance. They're also worried about productivity. They're also worried about sales. They're worried about all of these things. And these owners can only devote so much time and attention to cybersecurity. So it ends up oftentimes being a little bit of an afterthought until there's an attack, and then suddenly it's in the forefront and we deal with it, and then it slowly fades back into kind of the back because other priorities and urgencies come up. And then I think there is still fundamentally, and it's too bad, but there is still this kind of belief that it's not going to happen to me. I think too many organizations still feel like it's going to be the other guy. I'm going to be fine. I really can't say this enough. It is going to be you. It will be every single business. And to be honest, it probably already has been you. Something like 60% of attacks go undetected. So there's a very good chance that if you think you haven't been attacked, you probably have. And if you have been attacked and you knew about it, then you know what I'm talking about. But this just is not an if question. It is purely when and how often. Cybersecurity is something that we're all going to deal with, kind of like accidents in our automobile policy. If you have a big enough fleet with enough cars on the road, you will end up with some sort of an accident at some point in your track record. The same is true of cyber. It's no longer if, it's just when and how often, and what can we do to minimize the risk and the impact so that it's not as damaging to the organization, so we don't have a situation where it's totally bankrupting the company. All right, you can go ahead. So we have just a couple of quick poll questions just to kind of get a little bit of a sense of the audience. So you can respond to these 2 questions nice and easy. Go ahead. So the first question is, have you ever fallen for a phishing attack? So phishing attacks, if somebody doesn't know, is when you get an email that you're not supposed to click on, they're asking for some information, and you inadvertently click on the email and give them the information that you realize later you shouldn't have given out.
I'll give it like 10 seconds here.
So this is about what I would have expected. The definitely not, I'm going to really push back on you. I think the chances of that being true are pretty small. I can tell you, I'm the CEO of an IT company. It's happened to me. It's happened to every single one of the 55 people in this building. I know because we test them constantly, and we do get just about everybody to fall for it sometimes. These attacks are just so sophisticated that a lot of times you don't even realize you've fallen for one. So there's 28% of people who know they have, and the 56 who probably know but didn't want to say it. And then those 16, either you are the smartest people in the world, or you just don't realize that it's happened to you. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. So have you ever personally been part of any kind of a data breach?
Just like 5 more seconds here.
All right. So for somebody who said definitely not, is anybody brave enough to post their email address in the chat? I won't expose anything, I promise, but I'm just curious if there's anybody who feels very confident they haven't, who's willing to share their email address. We'll get any brave volunteers here. All right, I'm just going to steal the screen from Reynolds for 1 second. And I just want to show everybody one easy tool that you can do on your own in your own privacy. There's a website called haveibeenpwned.com. And I'll show you my own email address. I'll be the brave volunteer. So you can type in a personal email address, a work address, whatever you want. And what this is going to show is every time you've been involved in a data breach. So I've been involved in 11 of them. Now, I don't have any control over this. I was involved in the Equifax one. That's not my fault. I happened to be in Equifax's database and they got hacked. I was involved in the Apollo one. I was involved in the LinkedIn one that was back in 2021. My Fitness Pal got hacked in 2018. I was in there. So this just shows you that even if you don't think you've been involved in any kind of an incident, odds are some business you have done business with has been breached, and so your information is out there. And so it's just an easy thing. You can go ahead and steal the screen back from me, Reynolds. It's an easy website that you could check out and just see, have I, and if so, which ones? And it gives you a sense of what kind of data might be out there about yourself. All right, let's keep going. So next thing I'll do is just kind of give you a little bit of a quick profile of who are these people out there trying to hurt us. So first, there's a social engineer. These are the people who are doing a lot of very creative tactics to try to impersonate people in your organization. So they may be claiming to be the CFO. They may be claiming to be an employee trying to get your direct deposit changed. They may be the CFO who needs you to buy gift cards. Please do not buy anybody gift cards. You think nobody would fall for it. Once a month, we have a client who some employee thought it was real and bought gift cards. Then you've got the spear phisher. So this is the phishing attack. These are the people who want your password. This is probably the most common type of attack we're seeing right now, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You've got the traditional hacker. This guy's got an axe to grind. This is somebody who's targeting a very specific company. They're not doing mass scale attacks. They're not trying to just get a bunch of data. This is somebody who's probably going after somebody maliciously. Usually we'll see this if a business has a strong political stance or has a very, very public face and somebody's trying to cause harm to that organization. Some people don't think of the rogue employees as cyber criminal, but they absolutely are. This could be a salesperson on their way out the door who wants to take the customer database with them. It could be an angry employee who wants to destroy data on their way out the door. It could be somebody who's siphoning off data to sell it. So one of your cyber criminals could be one of your own employees. That's something you need to be mindful of and be thinking about. And then, of course, there's the ransom artists. These are the ones who are holding us hostage to give us so that we will give them money in exchange for something. Most commonly, it's in exchange to get control of our own networks back. So they've locked down our network and they're going to sell it back to us. But the newest form of this, and it's annoying, is they get into your system. They steal embarrassing data. Typically, they go onto the CEO and CFO's computers, steal all of their email, and then they just start leaking stuff onto the internet. They usually post it on social media, embarrassing things you said about an employee, contracts with customers, pricing information, all kinds of stuff you don't want out on the internet, and they just keep doing it until you pay them their ransom. And what they love about that attack is there's no thing you can do about it. You can't restore from backups because it's your reputation. So they're getting more and more creative with these types of attacks. You can go ahead. So let's just talk briefly, kind of, I mentioned in a minute, we talk about what's going on right now. Like, what are the attacks that we're seeing in the moment in the last 60 days that I think business owners and other people in organizations really need to be paying very close attention to. So I picked 4. You can go to the next slide. So these are the 4 that you absolutely need to have top of your radar. Next staff meeting, you should be talking about these. These are the things that are happening. So first, we're seeing a huge spike in direct deposit rerouting. This was a thing a few years ago, and then it kind of died out. It has totally come back, and it's come back in force. You've got the lazy ones, where somebody basically creates a fake Gmail address with the name Matt Geffin, goes on Webber and Grinnell's website, sees who's in charge of payroll, HR, something in their title, maybe goes on LinkedIn to figure this out. And then they email that person from this fake Gmail address and say, hey, Susie, I need you to change my direct deposit. I got a new bank. Here's my routing number, my checking account number. Susie exchanges some emails back and forth, and pretty soon direct deposit's been changed. And I say those are lazy ones because they're not that hard to identify. They're coming from outside email addresses. They're pretty easy to verify. Susie should just have a rule. I don't accept direct deposit from anybody who's not emailing from a company email address. However, this is where they've stepped up their game. We're now seeing this whole wave where somebody gets into somebody's email, and the attack they're doing is then changing the direct deposit for the employee whose email they accessed. So now they're replying to an email from the HR person in the inbox. It's the right email address. It's usually in reply to an email that was already sent by HR. So it's like in a nice thread with a chain of command, and it all looks legitimate. They ask questions, they respond back. And during COVID, where we can't just walk over somebody's desk and ask them, hey, did you send me this email? More and more, these are becoming effective. So we really, really, really strongly recommend have an internal policy in your company that no direct deposit is ever changed without a verbal confirmation. And that verbal confirmation should always be initiated by HR, not the employee calling HR, because even those phone calls can be faked. Credential harvesting is still the biggest attack out there. This is the one that has been causing the most heartache. Basically, this attack, they get into one email box, usually because some employee fell for a phishing email. They get into your 365 account as, we'll just say, Joe Schmo. Once they're in a Joe Schmo's mailbox, they have this email already lined up to go that they're going to blast out to anybody Joe Schmo has ever emailed. That email is going to say, hey, I have a secure file I need you to take a look at. Click here to open it up. That's going to bring them to a website where they're going to enter in a username and a password, usually from Microsoft 365. The hacker now knows another person's mailbox, and then they go into that person's mailbox and they launch the same attack. And they just keep doing this. And inside of a couple hours, these hackers could generate thousands of credentials. Those credentials they can sell for $30 to $50 online. So 30 to 50 bucks per credential, you just collected thousands. That's a pretty good payday for a few hours of work. And so that's the attack there. They're not actually going to use the credentials. They're going to sell them to somebody else who's then going to do some other attack. And that's an important thing to realize, is that cybersecurity has become an ecosystem. Some companies have focused on just doing the credential harvesting. Others have focused on just building the ransomware. Others focus on deploying the ransomware. Others focus on doing the negotiation to collect the money. It's become this ecosystem where you might be buying and selling and partnering and having vendors, all cyber criminals trying to take our money. The third is ransomware. I think this is one that most people are pretty familiar with. We talked about that already. And then the fourth is one you need to be very, very careful of, which is wire fraud. And these are the man in the middle attacks I was talking about earlier. So basically what they're going to do is they're going to get into somebody's mailbox. It could be you, or it could be one of your customers, or it could be one of your vendors. Once they're in there, they will sit and wait for a long time. These people can be insanely patient. And what they're going to wait for is some transaction, some email thread where basically somebody's saying, hey, you owe me money, or you need to give me money, or there's some exchange of money that's going to happen. It could be a large purchase. It could be a settlement. It could be a new product you're distributing. It could be an acquisition payment. It could be an escrow payment. We've seen everything. Basically, they sit and wait. And as soon as they see that transaction, they intersect themselves. They're going to reply to the same thread that's been going back and forth. It's going to have all the email behind it. It's going to look 100% legit. And they're going to such extreme lengths. They're downloading logos off the company's website, making invoices that look perfect. They have all this information because they've been watching your email for 4 weeks. They know exactly what your emails look like, how you sign them, what your signature looks like. They get every detail right. And their success rate is abhorrently high. Unfortunately, if you don't realize you wired money to the wrong place in the first 48 hours, it's very hard to recover that money. The laws that exist to help with this kind of ransomware recovery or wire fraud recovery are pretty antiquated. The only agency that's any good at it is Homeland Security. So you're out a lot of money in most of these cases. So these are the 4 attacks you really have to be careful of. And you really want to be super vigilant about making sure you're not vulnerable to these 4 things. And the last thing I want to show you is kind of how are they getting in? What are the tools and techniques they're using right now to conduct these attacks? You can go to the next slide. So these are the biggest things we're seeing. First of all, there are still way too many businesses that do not have MFA on at least their email, if not also their remote access. If you don't have MFA, I kind of describe it as you have a building and you have a lock on the door, but no alarm system.
Delcie, will you just say what MFA is, just in case anyone doesn't know?
Yes, thank you, Reynolds. It's a great question. So MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. Think of it like when you go to your bank's website and they send you a text message and they want you to enter in the code. That's a form of multi-factor authentication. So if you have a building and you have locks on it but no alarm system, I can steal a key, I can pick the lock, or I can just break down the door and I'm in your building and now I'm done. If all you have is a password, all you have is a lock on your door. A lock is penetrable. A lock can be breached. And once that lock is breached, they're in the building. The MFA is like the alarm code. Now I break into the building and I still have to have the code for the alarm system, which I don't have. I've got 30 seconds for the police show up and I'm out of there. So an MFA is an absolutely critical. It's no longer a good best practice. It's no longer me telling you this is something you should think about. This is a mandatory. You have to lock down your important stuff like email and remote access with MFA. The next is EDR. This stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. It's basically an advanced form of antivirus where instead of just looking for viruses, it's looking for bad behavior. It's looking for files being encrypted, logins from strange IP addresses, things that would make the anybody with any kind of cybersecurity background concerned and nervous. And it's going to alert and send off alarm bells and stop that so we can get in there. The lack of email filtering is still crazy. There's so many organizations that when they moved to Microsoft 365 did not purchase email filtering separately. So now their email just goes directly to 365. There's no security company managing their email. It's kind of like having a computer with an antivirus. Email without email security is the same as running a computer with an antivirus. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't have no antivirus. You should not also have no email filtering. Credentials that haven't been changed, we see this all the time. I'm going to show you in a second leaked credentials and how easy those are to obtain. If those have been leaked and nobody changes them, then basically it's just like you've got keys lying around on the parking lot that hackers can just pick up, walk up to your door, turn the key, and they're in the building. Staff that have not been properly tested and trained, this is essential. 90% of the attacks are going to be a vulnerability of one of your employees. If you can help them be smarter and better at stopping these, that is the biggest impact beyond anything else that you can do to lower your cybersecurity risk. Lack of effective monitoring. There are things you can do to properly monitor your network. And if you're not doing those things, you're certainly opening yourself up to vulnerability. And then exploiting vulnerabilities in old technologies. And I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but organizations that still have on-prem Exchange servers, that have Windows 7, God forbid, Windows XP, these things are like Swiss cheese. They are full of holes, and every hacker knows about the holes, and Microsoft is not patching them anymore. So basically, you might as well leave your window open. They're just going to come right in. They know the back window's open. They don't bother with the front door. They just walk around, come in the window, and now they're in your building. So these are the types of things that we're seeing. And this isn't hypothetical. This isn't theoretical. These are the things that, like in the last 2 months, we saw hackers use to get access to our 155 clients. So just a couple of quick polling questions here to kind of gauge the audience. Go ahead. So this first one, I just told you how important MFA is. Let's see if anybody's willing to admit it. So do you use MFA for email and remote access? Just for email, you don't use it, or you're not sure if you're using it? Okay, so this is about what I would have expected. Those of you who are not sure, my guess is no. Usually you're going to know if using MFA, because when you go to log into either the email or remote access, you have to do something else. Either with a cell phone, you have to press a button, you get a text message, you have to enter a code, you have to open up some app and click something. There's something you have to do to prove that you are who you say you are beyond just typing the username and password. For those of you who are just doing it for email, that's good. It's a great starting place, but I really would think about upping that to be your remote access as well, if you have anything you're remoting into. And this next question is just, are you filtering your email? Is somebody making sure that bad email is not getting to your inbox? And I don't mean spam. I mean scary, hacking, phishing, spoofing, those types of things.
Thanks everybody for your engagement. We're getting like 80% of people. This is great. All right, I'll launch this one.
So you guys would be the best class I've ever seen if this was actually true. What I find is it's actually more like 50% of businesses. So if we could be disproportionately affected because customers of Webber and Grinnell and Paragus are super smart companies and they take extra caution. So that very well could be the case that this is not a fair test. But in my experience, about half of businesses do not have their email filtered. I'm going to show you in a second how I can tell as a hacker or a potential hacker whether you are or aren't, and we'll take a look at that. Actually, let's go into that right now. So I'm going to steal the screen share again. And I'm just going to show you guys a couple of quick, easy things. I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to show you a little bit of kind of how hackers approach this and how they think about kind of vulnerabilities within networks.
Well, Delcie, I think this is a reason a lot of people came, so we can take some 10 minutes or so with this for sure.
Perfect. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do when we're evaluating an organization, if we were looking at it from a, hey, it's our job to make sure these guys are safe, is we want to see what can the hacker see without having to have any sophisticated tools, without having to spend any money, just what's publicly available. One thing that's publicly available to all hackers are what are called your domain records. Your domain records are basically all of the different records that have to do with your domain name. So I'll just take Paragus IT. Everybody has to know where paragusIT.com resolves to, otherwise you couldn't get to my website. So I have to publish these things that say, if you type in paragusIT.com, I want you to resolve to, in this case, Squarespace. So I want you to go to Squarespace and I want you to load up my website. There's other types of records though. The one that's probably the most important, or the two that are most important, are the record that you use for your email. Those are called MX records, and the records that you're using for remote access. So if I want to try to get into Paragus's network, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to try to look for how the remote access might happen. So By and large, most companies use either connect dot and then their domain name. And you can see Paragus is using that. That resolves to an IP address, Charter Communications in Hadley, Massachusetts. This has just told me a lot about Paragus that I can now use for an attack. The next thing I might type in is remote dot. That's another very, very common one. Yep, remote dot Paragus is also using. Now I've got two doors I can try to exploit and figure out. Another one is a lot of companies will use secure. We don't use secure, so no record found for that. So basically, they're going to have a bot. They don't do this manually. They have a robot that's just going to rip through domain names, trying records, and looking for records that are open and published. Then they're going to start to take that data, send it to a different department, and that department's going to further investigate it. The next one I want to look at, though, are the MX records. The MX records are the ones that they're really after. This is the 99% of the time what they're doing. So I'm going to type in a domain name. I'll use mine just for a moment. And there's two things they're looking for. I guess three things. One, they want to know, is your email being filtered by a third-party company? So I asked you that question earlier. 85% of you said yes. This is how you would know. If I type in this and I see a company like Mimecast, Sophos, Barracuda, I know that your email is being filtered by a professional email filtering company. If I see an IP address here, I know that your email address, that your email is in your building and there's no filtering service outside. If I see Microsoft Outlook here, which is the most common thing I see when I look at businesses, it means that you got 365, didn't hire a spam filtering company, and your email is going directly to Microsoft 365. That's helpful for me for two reasons. One, I know they're using Microsoft 365. So when I send a phishing attack, I'm going to make sure it's a Microsoft 365 phishing attack. It's going to be something like, your mailbox is almost full. Click here to expand your storage. Or we deleted 5 files from your inbox because they contain sensitive information. I'm going to send you something knowing that you have 365, knowing that that email will seem normal to you, and knowing you're going to click on it. So I don't want you to know I'm using 365. And in this case, you can't see that. All you can see is I use Mimecast. Mimecast is one of the top 5 email filtering companies in the world. I know that I'm going to have a hard time getting through Mimecast email filtering. And I don't know what's behind Mimecast. I don't know if he's on Google or 365 or something else. So I don't know as much as a hacker to go after Paragus as I would if I typed in something else and just saw Microsoft. The other thing that we're looking at are these 3 records right here, especially the first 2. DMARC records basically certify that email coming from your server has to come from a very specific place. So right now, if you don't have a DMARC record, I can set up a mail server in 5 minutes. I can send email and say that my email address is webberandgrinnell.com. There would be nothing in the world to stop that unless Webber and Grinnell has a DMARC policy like this one that says, no. We have decided that all mail from Webber and Grinnell Insurance is going to come from this IP address. If you see email that's not coming from this IP address, I can guarantee you it's not ours. Do not let that through your inbox. Don't deliver it to the end user. So DMARC basically helps to guarantee that people who send email are who they say they are, not are pretending to be somebody. So those are very important things. So is there anybody who wants me just to quickly type in their domain name and see what we can see about them? All right, we got a volunteer. Go ahead and just, what's your domain name? All right, perfect. So let's look at wsfinish.com. And we're not going to see anything that's not proprietary, that's not public record. There's nothing super proprietary here. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got here. A couple of good things. You do have a DMARC policy, and it is published. That's good. What's a little concerning, and we'd have to dig into this a lot more, is basically there's no obvious email filter here. What I'm seeing here is all these MX MTA routes that are going to Cogent Communications. Now, it's possible that Cogent Communications has some sort of filtering service behind this, but to me, this looks like a non-published route, which means that I can probably start to exploit it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on each of these IP addresses. I'm going to drill down to where they are. I'm going to run filters and scans on them, and I'm going to see if I can find a vulnerability behind them. So this is how I put in the medium. It's certainly definitely not bad. Could it be a little better? Probably, but this is definitely not bad at all. Anybody else want me to quickly type in theirs?
We have a raised hand. Let me have a look there. Sharon, if you're volunteering, send us. Oh, yep, cstrucking.com. Thanks, Sharon.
Let's take a look. All right, so here's a great example. And Sharon, by no means am I picking on you. I know a lot. I know you're on Google. I know that your email is not being filtered, that it's going directly to Google. So what I'm seeing here is a bunch of Google IP addresses. The only reason you'd have all these Google IP addresses and all these Google addresses is if Google was your email provider. And because there's nobody in front of it, there's no Mimecast, there's no Sophos, I know that I have, all I have to know is how to get around Google's mail filter, which is not that high a bar. And I know that I shouldn't send you a 365 attack because your staff aren't going to click on that. I need to send you a Google attack, something from Google Workspaces or Google Domains that says, hey, your Google Sheet has been corrupted. Click here to recover it. I'm going to use this information to target you. I also know you don't have a DMARC record and you're not using DMARC policies, which means that if I don't have to even bother with this, if I want to go after one of your customers, I can just email your customer, tell your customer I'm from cstrucking.com, and your customer is going to take that mail because it has no reason not to. There's nothing out there in the world saying that CS Tracking email has to come from here. It can come from anywhere. There's one more I'll just do real quickly, and then I want to show you the second half of the demonstration. All right, so it's the exact same thing with National Vinyl. I know you're a Google customer. You do have a DMARC policy, so that's a step up, but there's no third-party filter, and I know that your email system is Google. So this is a free tool. You don't need to be an IT person to run this. Anybody can go to mxtoolbox.com, and when you get to that website, all you have to do is type in your domain name and hit MX lookup, and you will see what I see. You're looking at here, and you're looking at here. So this is not some complicated tool. This is something anybody could run in their own time if they wanted to. The next thing I want to show you is what are called leaked or stolen credentials. So when a data breach happens and information is stolen, typically that information is then sold on something called the dark web, which is like a secret internet. Once it's been sold and used, after that, it typically gets posted out to the internet. And so what happens is once it's been posted, anybody in the world can use that information to gain access to your systems. So is there anybody who's willing to have me run their domain name and just see what we see about their company? Maybe one of the people who already volunteered. Jean, Sharon, or Anita, is that okay with any of you? Sharon says yes. Let's just run Sharon's. So, and this is the report that Reynolds said we're happy to run for anybody who wants us to. So there'll be a moment where you can let us know if you'd like us to run it. We'll send it to you privately instead of in front of 65 people. But let me just show you what this looks like. So we're going to put in cstrucking.com. And what we're looking for is anytime there's been data stolen that has that in it. In her case, it's just 4 times. That's not a high number. But what we do see here is that Sharon, at some point, maybe not right now, used a password that starts with this, and the hackers get to see the whole password. I'm blocking it out for the benefit of Sharon and for everybody else on this call. But this is probably a real password that Sharon has used at some point in time. It may not be the Windows password, and it may be one that she's changed a couple times since then. But what we often see with people is they reuse the same passwords. They change a number, they add a letter, they put an exclamation point, they put a 4 in the middle. Turns out we're not that unique. We're very predictable, and hackers know that. So what they do is they take this password, they put it into a machine. That machine tries every variation of that password, and it tries it on Staples, on Amazon, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on your company email, on your bank's accounts. And it just tries to see if that username and that password or some version of that password is still working anywhere. And it all happens instantaneously. So all they have to do is decide, right, let's go after Sharon, boom, and in a second, they have what access that still allows them to use. So it's really, really important that you're monitoring for this data, because if this happens to you, you need to know that your password is out there and you want to change it instantly. This password dropped on 8/15, which means it's already been 2 months of hackers using it. You want to change these passwords the instant they're available. And there's a service that will allow you to know that your password got leaked and then allow you to respond. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Reynolds.
Awesome. So at this point, here, let me share my screen because I'm going to turn over to Matt in a moment here. But at this point, if anyone who didn't have a chance to have us do this live with everyone here, if you would just in the chat or the Q&A, whatever you're more comfortable with, just put your name and company name. And I guess, Delcie, it'd probably be helpful to just get the URL right off the bat, right? The domain. Would that help you?
Yeah, it certainly helps. I can always look it up, but it's helpful if you have it.
So anyone who wants a report sent with this kind of information after the webinar, please put that into the chat to us now or in the Q&A. If you don't put it in there, we probably won't take the time to do it. We'll assume you're not interested. You could always email us later, but we'll use that to determine who gets it afterward.
I'm interested.
All right, Webber and Grinnell, writing it down. All right, so switching gears here for the last section, I'm going to turn over to Matt to talk about insurance. Here we go.
Everybody's really excited right now. I can tell. I
I'm
can
gonna
feel
blow
the
my
energy.
party
I can
horn,
feel
ready?
the energy.
I blew the
Yes.
party horn.
So thanks, Delcie. That was great. So Webber and Grinnell, I guess a quick intro to us. For those of you that don't know us, we're a regional broker here in Northampton, Massachusetts. We have about 50 employees, 2 locations, one here, one in Holyoke. And as a regional broker, we focus on 3 areas: personal insurance, so home and auto; commercial insurance, and of course employee benefits. Those are the 3 areas that we focus on. And for our advisory business, which is our commercial and employee benefits, we work off of something called a risk platform. And the risk platform stands for risk management, insurance, safety, and compliance. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today falls into the R of risk management. And so we'll keep it pretty brief here. We've got about 10 minutes to fly through these slides because I do want to leave time at the end here for questions and answers. So let's start with a poll. Go ahead, Reynolds. All right, 2 for 1 here. So
Yeah, I'll give
does
this
your
like
company,
30 seconds.
what's that?
I'll give this one like 30 seconds, a lot to read.
Yeah, so question 1 is, does your company have a cyber insurance policy? And of course, the excellent follow-up to that is, how well do you understand it? So let's see what we've got here. I'm sure everyone is an expert, and for those of you that are, can definitely take over for me here.
All right, about 5 more seconds to get your answer in.
All right. So about 50% of you have one, 25% are not sure, okay. And 21% do not have one. And then how well do we understand those? Some experts in the room, some understand it pretty well. No clue whatsoever. It's a very honest answer. I appreciate that. We can go ahead and close that. So, I mean, I guess for the ones that aren't sure, I guess what I would say is, on a typical commercial package policy these days, they are going to do what's called throw-in coverage, or some very small basic amount of coverage. So that may be why you're not sure, because maybe you saw something where you were charged for some type of cyber coverage. That's really common right now. And again, it's a very small amount of coverage that the insurance company is giving you for a very nominal price. But overall, the market, it certainly has changed in the last few years as the cyber incidences have just really increased. And so you've got a lot of different players in the market. And from an overall market standpoint, we're in what's called a hard market environment, where rates are increasing rapidly. There's a high demand for coverage, especially for this line of business. There's capacity issues, meaning we have so much demand, the insurance companies are only willing to take on so much risk. So that becomes an issue, and that certainly drives rates. And again, per what we saw in the very beginning of the presentation with all of the, what Delcie called the light show, there's a lot of attacks out there, and the insurance companies know that. There's a lot of data out there that the underwriters are using when they're pricing a risk. I think what's important to note on the market from a type of carrier standpoint is that there's really three types of carriers that are going to insure a cyber risk. There's your standard carriers like a Travelers or a Hanover. There's your surplus carriers like a Hiscox. Lloyd's of London is a commonly heard of surplus carrier. And then you've got program carriers, or what are called specialty carriers like Evolve, which is all they do is cyber coverages. I think what's important to note is, depending on the type of business that you are and the type of data that you have and what you do with that data, your options may start to narrow and your pricing might start to increase. For example, if I'm doing a lot in the defense industry, that's going to be a lot different than somebody that's in the retail space who's taking credit card information. So very different depending on the industry, the types of coverages that you're looking for. Go ahead, Reynolds. So Delcie mentioned this before, and we started to review some of those requirements. He had that list that we were looking at with all of the acronyms on it for multi-factor authentication, and the other one that I can't remember, EDR. But the requirements up front are what are going to matter. When someone is underwriting the risk, they're going to start asking about those upfront controls. And really, because the intent of the insurance is to be that last resort, that after all the things that we tried to do didn't work, and we've had a loss or a breach, the insurance is there to help make us whole financially. So they're going to ask a lot of upfront questions, and this has changed a ton in the last 18 months even, from what I have seen. The application process has gotten longer. The requirements have gotten stricter. They're going to ask about servers. They're going to ask about where they're hosted. Are they on-site, off-site? How often do you back up? Passwords. Do you have MFA in place? What's your IT security look like? Firewalls, email filtering, all of those questions you're going to have to answer. They're also going to ask you how you manage IT. Do you use Paragus, or is there someone internally that you use? Employee training is big, and we've done that here at Webber and Grinnell in addition to other things, but employee training is big, and that's for cyber and anything else that you do. Underwriters want to understand how you're training your employees. And then, of course, banking and financial, they're going to ask about those types of things. Do you do funds transfers? How often do you do them? What is your verification process? All of those things are going to be important. And the key here is this is going to be what the underwriters price you off of. Depending on how you answer these things, you may get a good price. You might not get coverage at all. So it really depends on how you answer these things. And you also may get what are called subjectives, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Ultimately, though, they want to know how you're controlling claims. So I just, I put a cyber application up here from Evolve. Again, Evolve is an MGA. It's a specific program that all they do is cyber coverages. And I think there was some key things to note here on the beginning of this application. The first one being, what's your primary industry? It's really important. They want to understand what you do, and they want to understand what kind of data that you possess, right? That's really key. They're going to want to understand your revenue, how much, that revenue could determine how much you're being ransomed for, right? And so that, like Delcie had said before, small to mid-sized businesses are being targeted. So when they are targeted or they have a successful breach, how much are they going to ransom you for? And so the underwriters have to understand what your revenue looks like. It also will impact other aspects of the coverage. And then how many employees do you have? That's really key too. They're going to ask you questions. And again, it's not on this screenshot here, but they're going to ask you questions about who are your top clients? How do you protect that data? What are your IT resources? And how do you interact with those clients as well? Go ahead, Reynolds. Going quickly here, but we'll save some time at the end for questions. So like my friend Will Farrell says here, I love insurance, and insurance is my favorite. And in the world of cyber, you really have three types of coverage. And again, for the purposes of time, I'm not going to go deep here on coverage. I would be happy to spend time with any of you after this session going very deep on coverage. I'll bring a 200-page policy out. We'll dig through it together. It'll be great. But for the purposes of this presentation, what you need to understand is there's really three types of cyber coverage that you need to pay attention to. There's first party coverage. So that's stuff that happens to you. So think about, I own a building and my building burns down. I buy fire coverage. Same thing for cyber. When something happens to me, I have coverage for those losses. There's third party. So that's stuff that happens to someone else and I'm sued for it. And then last but certainly not least, this is the crime coverage part. Crime, and we'll look at it in a second here, but that's where you get your coverage for the extortion event. So just a couple, again, I'm not going to go deep on all of these, but these are some examples of first party coverage. And so again, when you have a breach, there are a lot of costs, as Delcie can probably attest to, that a company will incur from the response to that incident, legal costs and regulatory costs. You're going to need to hire somebody like Delcie to come in and do some forensics analysis. So there's IT security and forensic costs that come along with it. There's communication, right? We have a breach. Now I have to send out letters to everyone in my database, right? And let them know that they were breached and offer them credit counseling. That's a coverage that you can purchase in addition to other first party. Keep going, Reynolds. There's another page of first party. Here's some of the big ones that we certainly have seen. Damage to your system and how to get it back, right? That's a huge cost. Delcie has a team of highly experienced, very expensive IT folks. So, when they're in there doing the damage control, there's a cost to that. Business interruption and business income is a really, really important one. And again, we think about this oftentimes when it comes to my building burning down, but you might not think about the loss of income you have when your IT data is completely locked up. So if you're encrypted, right, and now you can't bill your customers or look at your financials or do email or whatever it is while you're encrypted, there's certainly potential for a loss of income. And it's certainly a cash flow implication. So the insurance company, just like when your building burns down, they're going to provide you coverage if you purchase it for that loss of income and any extra expenses that might go along with it. Another interesting one, which we in the property world called contingent business income or dependent business interruption. When I rely on Delcie and Delcie's company is shut down, and now I have a financial loss because of it, that's a contingent business income loss. And again, we see it commonly in the manufacturing world when if you're putting together something that you sell and you rely on someone to provide you a component part to that and their building burns down. Well, same thing in the IT world. If they are locked up and can't provide you that component part and now you have a loss of income because of it, that could be a dependent business interruption or contingent business interruption type of coverage that you might go after there. Keep going there, Reynolds. Trying to go quick here. So we talked about first party, that stuff that happens to you. Then there's third party coverages. So these are things like I have a security breach and I'm getting sued because my computer network is used to carry out a denial of service attack, right? So I've had a breach, but it's caused someone else a loss. So that could be the network security, that could be privacy liability. So I'm now being sued for those issues. This is where you're going to pick up third party coverage. Again, just think of it as like general liability. When someone slips and falls on your property, you have liability coverage to defend you and pay any settlements. Similar concept here with your network. Management liability protects your senior executives when they're sued because of a claim. And then of course you've got regulatory fines, PCI fines, penalties, assessments. There's all sorts of coverage. Again, we're talking in broad generalities. All insurance companies are going to be different in the way they address these issues. And so it's really, really important that you understand what you're buying when you purchase these coverages, because this might get very specific here on these coverages. Another policy could be extremely broad and exclude a lot of things. So you've got to really pay attention when you get that quote from your broker as to what you're buying. Some more third-party coverages. These are more towards media liability, but defamation, intellectual property. This one right here, could provide technology errors and omissions. So that's like Delcie's company. He provides, a service from an IT standpoint, and he doesn't perform his job. that's an E&O issue. Keep going, Reynolds. I want to get to the crime. So this is the third leg of the stool here from a cyber standpoint, and these are cyber crimes. And so again, Delcie said a lot of the targets here could be towards wire fraud, right? Or different types of, monetary losses that these hackers are going after. And so this is where you pick up a lot of that coverage. And again, just an example, you can buy a lot of different types of coverage, a lot of different limits, but some common ones that I see that are really important are funds transfer fraud. That's really key. Theft of personal funds. And then most importantly is making sure that you have extortion coverage, because when the hacker encrypts all your data and says, give me 5 Bitcoins to get your data back, that's going to fall to that extortion limit of coverage. And so you want to make sure that we have that. Keep going there, Reynolds. So biggest lesson here is read the fine print, because as someone asked me in one of the questions earlier as we were going through Delcie's thing, so up front they're going to ask you a lot of questions, then they're going to give you a quote, and you've got to attest when you sign that paperwork that you are complying with things like MFA or offsite data backup. These are going to be conditions that an underwriter could extend to you. They're often called subjectives in order to bind the coverage. So I've seen all different kinds of things here, and it's going to be 100% dependent on how you answer that upfront question. So if you're a certain type of business that has highly sensitive data and you don't do offsite data backup, or you don't have MFA in place, an underwriter might extend you a quote and it'll be completely subjective to you complying with that. Now, they may not say you have to comply with it today. Maybe they'll give you 30 days. Maybe they won't, but they could make you comply with it in some way. So again, it's dependent on how you answer that application, and your broker should clarify all of that for you. So if there are subjectives on that quote, it's your broker's responsibility to outline those subjectives, and also, quite frankly, negotiate those subjectives. So if we can get an understanding from Delcie, hey, yeah, we're in the process of implementing MFA, or we do have offsite backup, this is what it is. Oftentimes I've gotten an email from a provider, sent it off to the underwriter, and that could satisfy that requirement. Your brokers can negotiate a timeline for meeting those conditions. So always remember that. If they say, hey, I need MFA, well, we know that can't happen tomorrow and we need the coverage, you can negotiate a 30-day subjective or a 60-day subjective. So I think that's really important. And, I've seen coverage either denied, so they won't extend a quote, or I've seen really high premiums if a lot of these things aren't in place. And obviously, when we see high premiums because things aren't in place, it's because an underwriter is funding for future losses. Because as Delcie said, these things are happening all the time. The underwriters understand that. They stay very in tune with these things. Usually they're cyber specific underwriters that understand what's happening in the market and are very in tune with all the IT requirements. And so they're funding for those losses. So if you get sticker shock, there's a reason there. And so you got to dig into that. You got to understand why, because if you maybe comply with some of those subjectives, maybe you can get that price down. Just always remember, different restaurants have different menus, right? Different insurance companies have different menus. You can buy lots of different types of coverages. You can buy different limits. You can buy different deductibles or retentions. And a retention is just like a deductible, only you pay first, meaning as soon as the breach happens, maybe my retention is 10 grand. So I pay first 10 grand, then the insurance company kicks in, right? So there's all different ways you can build these coverages. You just have to ask. That's as fast as I can do cyber coverage, Reynolds and Delcie.
That was awesome. That was great.
I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah.
And like I said to the group, I'm really happy to spend time with you after this session if you want to dig into things, or if you have questions on specific coverages that you might have.
Awesome. So we're at our time, but we will stick around for several minutes for Q&A for those who have the time and have questions they want to ask. A quick reminder, we will follow up with an email. Those of you who gave us your information in the chat or the Q&A, we'll whip up a report for you on your cyber vulnerabilities. And I'll make sure to share Matt and Delcie's contacts as well, so you can get in touch with them if you are interested in hearing more about the services offered. If you're terrified and you need an IT company, I'm sure Delcie would love to talk to you about that, and Matt about coverage. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll open the floor for questions for those who can stick around.
Just to get out ahead of this one, my name is spelled with only one T.
It's like the thing you step on when you go into somebody's home. Not seeing any. Yep, give another minute if people are thinking about it. Anything we talked about, or maybe something we didn't talk about that you think's important and want to hear more about. Happy to jump on it here. Well, looks like there's no questions, and guess you guys did a good job.
We nailed it,
Covering
Delcie.
stuff. So yeah, thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate it. This is such an important topic. I want to thank both of you for your time. You're both very busy people, and it's clear you really care about your clients and making sure everybody's protected. So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Reynolds.
Thank you. Go
Thanks
get
everybody
MFA.
for joining.
All right, take
Go
care,
get
everyone.
MFA.
Yeah, go get multi-factor authentication.
I want to sleep at night.
Yeah.
That's all I ask.
All right, thanks everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
See ya.